Good afternoon and welcome to this session of Boat Electrons 2022. And it's great to be with you, and thank you to the team, Theo and the team, for inviting me to talk to you today. My name is Jonathan Crossley. I'm a composer, improviser, guitarist, performer. Importantly, I think blurring the lines between all those. I'm also a lecturer in music at the University of Liverpool, where I teach some new courses there, some interesting new courses in improvisation for polygenre improvisation to cross their classical and popular music students using networked Ableton systems. And also, I'll be launching a course shortly in hardware hacking and hyper instrument design, doing some hardware hacking of toys, etc., and some Arduino work, etc. But today I'm here specifically to talk to you about a new album project and to not only share about the project, but also to share about its relationship to work that stretches back all the way to 2011, and to kind of illustrate how the project came about or emerges out of a lot of other preliminary work, and how it really arrived at this point. But before I do any of that, I thought it'd be really good to maybe just play you some music. So as you can see, the project is titled Inhale. Um, it features compositions by myself with Nick Horston. Nick is a young Wits music graduate who then also went on to do a master's in film composition at the Film Academy of Europe. An excellent young composer and really, really good at string arranging. So Nick worked with me on realizing some dreams in terms of the colors of the strings and also additional melodic material and contributions to the compositions. The work also centers around continuing work with two musicians who I love playing with, and we kind of have an understanding of, on the left there, obviously Carlo Mombelli, and on the right of him, Jono Sweetman. Jono and I, we've been playing together now for 15 years. Can you believe it? So, and I remember Carlo coming back to South Africa very vividly. So we the core trio of the group is bass, guitar, and drums, and lots of layers of synthesis with strings. The strings are principal violin from the Joburg Philharmonic, Miro, and Jonathan Mayer on second violin. Waldo Alexander is on viola on the recording, and Susan Mutan is on the cello. The project was recorded by Joe Arthur at Flame Studios, assisted by Nkanyezi Martin. We're very thankful to Flame Studios for supporting us in this. It was also then mixed by Joe Arthur at the Loft and mastered by another South African, Rogan Kelsey, although down in Surrey here in England. So truly a South African project, but with legs here in the UK. And if you are perchance over here, it will be launching on the 2nd of December at the Tongue Auditorium, which is in the Yoko Ono Lennon Centre in Liverpool. So how did the project come about? What's the thinking behind it? I think these are interesting questions. And how does it relate to kind of previous work? Well, that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. So kind of a little survey, but most importantly, I'd like to talk to you about thinking around signal path and flow within systems design as being part of both the compositional and improvisatory practices which I've pursued for the last 10 years. So when did it all start? It all started really with this album, or this concert, which was called "What If the Machine Spoke Back to You." It was a concert in 2011, held at Wits. It was the first concert in what became my PhD research. It featured Justin Badenhorst on drums, Jacob Israel on electronics, and myself on guitar. The music, if you want to call it that, was literally drawn on a small sheet of paper that was backstage, which was essentially just a line with some curvature to it. And the musicians were given 50 minutes to explore this line in any way they want. There were no instructions really, apart from this. And this is the signal path for this concert. And this was completely intentional and thought out and discussed at length and developed by Jacob Israel and I beforehand. And so it placed Jacob Israel in the center there, the digital performer / random generator, as noted, at the center of this plan. What would happen is the drums were acoustic drums. They were mic'd up though, and the guitar had multiple signals coming out of it, but essentially both of these instruments, the drums and the guitar, as you can see on the signal path, flowed into the mixing console at the top and then were fed out to the audience. They were also duplicated and sent to Jacob Israel's system, which had a separate digital mixing system, and modified versions of these signals were then fed back to the monitors. So the drummer and myself on the guitar, we had stage monitors, which were both feeding us our own signals so we could monitor and check. They were also sending us bits of Jacob Israel's signal so we could check and improvise with that, but also the modified signals. And this was a wonderful experience in the sense that it became very difficult during the concert to know whether you were making the sound yourself. Were you playing? Was this a feed from the instrument? Is it something that you were generating? Was it coming from the drums? There was a great sense of not confusion, but on-edgedness, in the same way as one would have with any free improvisatory gig or performance, where you have to be completely responsive and listening in a hyper-elevated state. The results of this are available on iTunes if you want to listen. Kind of expansive, glitchy soundscapes, some groove-driven stuff coming from Justin. Very, very unpredictable. And absolutely what was most important is that there was no rehearsal beforehand. We worked extensively on checking this design in the preparatory period, and literally the system, the signal path with all the cabling and stuff, took an entire day to set up. But once the thing was set up and we knew it was working, we went, struck for dinner, as you say, and came back and did the performance. So this Kim Boyle quote, I think, is pertinent in this way of thinking. So given the creative role participants play in exploring their musical environments, the role of the composer has largely become transformed to that of designer, while the traditional role of the performer has been subsumed by that of the player. To a certain extent, this situation is parallel in traditional open form works in which composers design open musical environments which serve to facilitate an awareness of process and collective becoming. So this idea of working as a collective, and the shifting role, of composition into systems design, etc. Now, I'm not suggesting that this Kim Boyle quote is the only way to do things, but I think that the idea that these areas are in flux and are in and of themselves a component of the creative endeavor has been something that I've explored. I later did a concert with Mpho Molekeng as African instrument specialist, where the composition or the systems design, in a sense, mimicked something completely different. So it was a different way of approaching it. In this case, we were working with an archaeological image taken from a LiDAR image of an archaeological dig. And what we noted about this is on this image of a settlement, there was a central area where things would happen, and Mpho explained, how the storyteller or a musician would be located in the center of the settlement. So we developed this idea of placing Mpho in the center of this art gallery, and that he would be mic'd. I mic'd him up in the kind of quadraphonic field, so he could move and turn to the audience. The audience was seated all around, and he could turn and speak to them as if they were gathered around to hear some sort of story. This was exploded out into a quadraphonic field, so you have 4 speakers in the corner. So those microphones kind of had an exaggerated sense of a fictional space. What's not noted in this diagram here is I was also to the side, and I was taking copies again, like in the previous concert, of these microphone signals and modifying them and feeding them back to Impo, and he was responding to them. So here's Impo to the center of the gallery. You can kind of see those mics pointing inwards, which allowed him to move freely. The concert was very quiet, and it allowed him to turn and speak to people and engage with them. But having lots of people extending backwards, the sense of being able to hear everything was great and an exaggerated field. Here's a little snippet from this as well. So what was happening there? The camera angle obviously doesn't reveal everything. It would have been great if I had a bird's eye view and to kind of reveal that. But you can see the way Impo is moving around, and you can hear obviously that there's multiple parts of his performance are being looped and fed back to him and modified in varying ways, creating kind of a lush kind of soundscape. But it makes, it means you gotta, you gotta really listen and be attuned. I think this 7th quote is useful. Musical attunement can occur at both a sympathetic and empathetic level. Empathetic attunement occurs when musicians are able to decenter and see things from other musical perspectives. And that was really, really important in this concert, that I found it challenging in the sense that Impo saw the entire event as a storytelling thing. And so when we were rehearsing and preparing the piece, it became clear that my own ideas about improvisation had to be set aside, favoring what was the dominant viewpoint, which was the storytelling community narrative. And therefore, the signal part that emerged out of that was designed to capture that idea. There was another album done in the same year. This album was done with Reza Kota, guitarist Reza Kota, and again, Jonathan Sweetman. And the signal path for this, the album was titled Blips. Again, it's available online. Looked at feeding the musicians material that I knew would material they would enjoy and would kind of stimulate the excitement inside the recording event. So compared to what the machine spoke back to, you can see on this signal path that there really isn't any modification being fed back to guitarist 1, which was Reza, or the drums. Guitarist 2, that's me. I was sending modified looped effects, change signals to each of them. The idea being in that I kind of know Reza and Jono well enough to give them things that I'm hoping they would enjoy and then they would respond to. So significant on that recording was there were no overdubs or no other layers. This was just exactly what was happening live between the three of us, and there were loops and stuff with the tempo changing. I was responding to Jono and he was responding to me, and Reza chose in that particular improvisation to kind of hold the fort against us. After these various experiments, I had a group called Deep Spacer, and this is an album that we made with a accompanying set of videos, which was presented at the National Arts Festival in 2020. This group kind of takes a hybrid version of all those, where you have tempo, both the bass guitarist and the guitarist in this case are having tempo elements controlled by someone else. The different instrumental sounds are fed into a console and then fed back. What's not shown clearly here, is it? No, it's not shown clearly here. I also had a microphone over the drums coming into my system. The guitar system on the left had 10 different outputs, which were bits of loops, bits of synthesizers, also bits of the drums that were being played live, and the bass that was being played live, modified and fed back to them. So this album was made in studio, but notable in this group, the music was intended to be of a popular music slant, so it intended to be tempoed rhythm. We explored forms like post-rock and rock, glitch and electronica, even dub and reggae influences at different points. And so to do that, we wanted tempo-based effects. So we set up a dummy cymbal with the drummer, Etienne Oosthuizen, and the cymbal then spat out MIDI information which controlled the bassist, which is Cesare Casarino. It controlled the bassist's tempo-based effects, and it's also then fed tempo into my Ableton system. So all the different electronic devices that were involved in the live improvisation had tempo, but the tempo was pliable and flexible based upon the drummer. This was really great because it allowed for something that I never thought before was possible, which was, improvising in a popular music paradigm, completely freely. And I always thought that would not be possible because, popular music and all these genres are so reliant on layered tempo-based effects, or it's so much a part of the aesthetic that, I'd never been able to do it before. Here's something from this group. It's a little video taken from the National Arts Festival, or a segment of video I'll play, but taken from the National Arts Festival screen. Oh, the videos are taken from the Sunday Bloody Sunday riots. And there is the good old Reverend Ian Paisley speaking about that. Anyway. So yeah, that was successful. Be able to do some contemporary music in a free improvisatory and tempo-based environment. That's what the signal path explorations allowed, but they also started to shape ideas about composition. This then led to kind of the Sonomorph series, which was a series of 4 albums done between 2020 and 2021. One of which was with Cameron Harris, which was presented, I think, 2 years ago at both Electrons. We played a live concert. Another one was a duet album, which the signal path is shown here, which was with the pianist Kathleen Tagg. This signal path, if you've been following, you'll recognize is almost identical to What If the Machine Spoke Back to You. Then the trio album, which was part of this series, which was with Carla Mombelli and Jono Sweetman, had the kind of most advanced or extended version of this. In the trio, you'll see here there's monitoring of the bass, or signal of the bass and signal of the piano or guitar, or whatever. That should say drums, actually. And what says piano there is drums. Anyway, it's parts of the drums going into the monitoring and generative system. And then coming back to the guitar, each of those are getting modified versions. But there's also, in this case, in the center, a generative system, which was some modulus synthesis units. And also I had a hardware-hacked omnichord playing through this, feeding information out to the group. This was felt, or it was pretty successful as a recording session. We went into studio, we had limited time, and we improvised for just on 3 hours and cut together an album from that. So, but again, this was completely free improvised. It wasn't really composed. So a little snippet from that record, you can hear Carla improvising. There's also kind of loops that are being generated and changing by themselves, and then the guitar playing over the top of that with Jono. So where's this led us with this project Inhale? So Inhale was kind of gathering together lots of different threads. Some of the work with Cameron was electroacoustic. With the work with Kathleen Tagg tended to be more tonal and open and spacious, more ambient. The trio album with Carlo and Jono often went to groove places, apart from one or two more jazz influenced ballads. And then on top of that, I did a solo album as well, which had like generative electronics inspired by Tangerine Dream and early Jean-Michel Jarre work. With guitar, in that case, I was looking at the work thinking about the work that Nils Fram and Oliver Arnolds have done in recent years, blending these classical or neoclassical, should we say, elements with electronics. So for the album Inhale, I wanted to put everything into one pot. So how would you take tempo-based elements to the kind of zenith? So where Deep Spacer was doing tempo-based music, how would you bring like really, really finessed tempo-based loops and synthesis elements into that environment? How at the same time would you write stronger or melodic material that was interesting? And then on top of that, also, how would you still find a way to improvise? So for Inhale, for the recording of Inhale, I created compositions where there were different layers of material, and then I have a foot controller, Keith McMillan soft step, which I programmed inside Ableton to allow me to jump between sections. And so I had very short time with Carlo and Jono in Johannesburg in April. We had 1 and a bit days of rehearsal. And so everything was pre-planned, but the idea was still in the rehearsal to allow Carlo and Jono to be completely free. I didn't prescribe the drum parts. Some of the bass parts were written, but a lot of it was really open and free to interpretation. what the grooves necessarily or the stylistic elements could become were also open, because the electronic compositional material was also quite glitchy and non-prescriptive, should we say. The work is also inspired by some of the artists that are kicking around, or some of the artists I've discovered of late and fallen in love with, effectively. The electronic artist Chris Clark, he did an album called Playground in a Lake, which was with the London Chamber Orchestra. Or it was launched with the London Chamber Orchestra and himself on electronics there. I was fortunate to see that at the Barbican Centre last year. And then also really inspired by this artist, Anna Meredith. Some of you may be familiar with her work. She's a composer who moves freely between electronic, classical, orchestral work. It's really an open season. So this album has string quartet work, as you heard in the beginning, which is quite tonal and simple. It also has electronic influenced work. It has some stuff that's very clearly, a few moments that are definitely funk jazz influenced. It also has some stuff that's definitely inspired by artists like Tigran Hamasyan, which I'll play in a second. So I'm going to play you 3 tiny little clips from the album as a taster. As I said, the album's not released yet. If there's questions after that, that'd be great. The 2 of the pieces here use a little rhythmic displacement technique, which I guess is kind of post-minimalist in a way. This is a little bit from Bounce, the first track on the album, and you'll hear a bit of that shifting rhythmic approach. Here's a little bit more substantial section from a track called First Operations. Influenced, it was written around the time of Putin's invasion. So I've got First Operation, Second Operation. There's also a track on the album called There's No Invasion. Here with Carlo is carrying the one melodic fragment, and then the strings and guitar carrying the other, and Jono's kind of freely moving between these kind of polyrhythmic elements. And then lastly, a small tidbit from the title track, Inhale. So there you have it. Thank you very much for, if you spent all the time, thank you for spending some time letting me talk about this record and the kind of signal path ideas that led up to it. Here's the sleeve. We're very thankful to the artist, South African artist again, Naomi van Niekerk, for the image that formed the vinyl cover. And I really hope that you get a chance to hear it when it comes out. And thank you again to Bode Electrons for having me today.
Jonathan, hi. Thank you so much. Wonderful work. And it's so great that you're with us again this year. I really appreciate it. I don't see any questions in the chat, so maybe I'll just fire away with 2 questions.
Yeah.
The first is, you chose not to speak about your work designing custom electric guitars and that interface to your creative work. If this is not a topic to be discussed, fine. I don't I don't mind. But you know, I met you um, basically while you were really very deeply intensively involved in instrument design. Is that the past, or have you moved on, or are you still busy on that?
No, I mean the hardware hacking course that I'll be that I'll be teaching at Liverpool now.
Okay.
It starts in April or so. That's going to be all kind of Arduino based and electronics. So you know they've got a really positive approach to it. So I'll be ordering lots of kids' toys. That's part of my job. Yeah, sort of navigating university procurement people to tell them, do you want to order kids' toys? And they ask why. I said, well, so we can wreck them. And so yeah, so that's still going on that side. And then also the Arduino, stuff and electronic stuff. I'm trying to keep it simple enough for students to grasp quickly and install those into their kind of whatever their instrument or system or compositional design is that they would like to be able to trigger things, etc. So that goes on in the teaching world. In terms of the cyber guitar stuff, which obviously you examined amongst meeting me, that guitar was very much hardware based, but it led me to really explore tactile stuff, and then I kind of moved across to, there were some devices that came out, they were actually more elegant and easier to use. In fact, the bodysuit thing from that is actually on my shelf over here, but I'm busy rewiring it, trying to bring it to life again. But I just recently bought a guitar. There's a maker in he's in Killarney in Ireland, and he solves all these problems. He won this, I don't know if you know the series Dragon's Den. It's like where you win seed funding, and he got a lot of seed funding for this idea he came up with. His name's Rob O'Reilly. If anyone's a guitarist, I want to check him out. I've got right behind me, hideously expensive thing. But inside it's got a massive computer, completely custom designed computer. He solved so many problems. I mean, under the bridge part of the guitar, he's got these sensors. I actually went to his workshop in Killarney to go see it. But he's got these sensors, which are the same sensors that they use in aircraft to detect minute flexes on the hull, so that they know that the integrity of the aircraft is 100%. So he got these. He's got 6 of them under each, one under each string, and these can they just detect the tiniest little bend on the string, and then turn that into code. So this guy's doing stuff that's like you'd have to be full time on it now.
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry, that's a ramble telling you about. Yeah, but anyway, that allows me, that guitar particularly allows me to control the software in new, much more powerful ways. So all the synths that you're hearing on this, or you'll hear on this new record, all the little parts are all played on the guitar. It's the first time I've been able to do that. So, as a guitarist, it's always that thing when you're programming or writing music on a DAW, everything's always keyboard focused, which is, so finally there's this instrument that allows me, I've never touched a keyboard.
Stunning. My next question, I think, is a little bit boring, but I'm fascinated by the fact that you move between styles, you musical styles, you move between like environments, and I mean, if I think of the challenges that you face, having to come up with an album that is more or less like jazz inspired, next thing you're working on an avant-garde experimental thing. Can you speak a little bit about how the heck do you do this?
Yeah, I mean, that's such an interesting topic, and I was literally talking to Joe Arthur about it. We spent actually an hour talking about this, and one of the things that I always experienced as a musician in South Africa was, especially growing up, there was always this kind of pigeonholing thing, which I find less of here, but I mean, I'm sure in the past it was the same. But when I started off as a classical musician, then I wanted to improvise and do jazz, and then the most amazing thing happened to me in the late 90s, early 2000s. I was playing, I was concertizing like crazy as a classical guitarist. And as soon as word got out that I was doing jazz, it just dried up. they stopped booking the concerts. It was really traumatic. It was like, wow, okay. And I wasn't I wasn't good enough yet to be booked as a jazz musician. So then I started playing corporate functions just because I had to feed myself, and stay alive until I got better at playing jazz stuff. And then I was also doing some studio work and stuff. And I was working for a great producer, a good friend of mine, Brian Schimmel, doing a lot of work with him. And then when I did the cyber guitar project, all of a sudden he stopped using me. And I actually spoke to him about it. I said, why are you not using me? He says, no, well, you're doing this avant-garde thing now that I don't understand. And it's like, so it had serious impacts on my career in South Africa. Right. And then, then lockdown happened. And I can honestly say lockdown was really great for me because it didn't matter whether you're going to get booked or not. You just made music. Sure. And so under lockdown, we did Deep Spacer and I did all these albums last year. Yeah. But the one thing I say to answer your question more succinctly is I've always loved lots of stuff. I will quite happily, and drives my kids crazy, I'll quite happily put on an album of Schubert, and then next I'll have a death metal album on, and it'll next be a noise. This morning I found these records of traditional music from Peru, and we put that on, and so this album is when you get to hear it. I mean, it's got that string quartet stuff on it, which is really beautiful. It's got some Nils Frahm inspired Ambient electronica. It's got some super dense stuff, and then right at the end of the piece, there's a John Scofield jam just to show we can still do it. So it really is mixed up, and that seems to be quite acceptable over in the UK, especially. People can do whatever they want. Sure. You got some questions popping up, I see here.
Indeed. Shall we read them out?
Yeah, why not?
Thanks, Dr. Jonathan Crossley. I realize that you often focus on improvisatory aspects, and your work is situated on the edge of what is possible during live performances. Do you find that if or when there is a structure in place beforehand, the results are too constricted, or does it have some merit in the improv process?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Merrill. I think to answer the question, it's best to talk about one's weaknesses, and I'm happy doing that. So I remember years ago, I was playing. I had a funk band. We did this album, Funk for the Shaolin Night, and it toured in Europe and stuff. So I was very focused on that. And Carlo, Lucas Degetti, was doing some free improv thing with Carlo downtown in Joburg. And Carlo, I don't know whether it was Carlo or Lucas that invited me. Lucas has been super kind to me. Anyway, but they invited me to play, and I'll never forget that day because I was so completely and utterly out of my depth. Like, it was shocking, it was quite devastating. And I realized that, with all the jazz stuff and improvisatory stuff that I was able to do, and being able to play classical music as well, that here I was just completely lost. I didn't have an idea. So to answer Meryl's question, I think different circumstances have different shapes to them. And if I go back to the talk that you just listened to, really that's what I'm learning. I'm learning that the shape of the system, which is defined by the people that are involved and the artistic and aesthetic goals of that, that has to be matched with a musical or system design that works for that. So that can be, in the case of working with Lucas that day, nothing, and you just flying by the skin of your teeth and hoping for the best, or it can be something that is really, really, structured in a sense of a score or fragments or etc. And to talk, just to go back to weakness again for one thing. I mean, Theo, you were there at that central PhD recital, and for my PhD work, I submitted 4 albums, of which the main one, where the examiners, yourself and Nick Collins and Jonathan Ito, were especially out for, was probably the worst. And it was the worst of the 4 concerts because it was so overthought. I really felt I had to have this massive graphic score. So I did this massive thing, and it was so complicated, and it actually damaged the music. Whereas the one that was just a year later than that with Lucas and Jono was absolutely great. We just
played some crazy versions of Nirvana, and it was a whole lot of fun. It was much, much better concert. So I think, you know, these days, I think if I was doing anything better, I think it would be it's better, better thought process and preparation. So when we went into the studio for this Inhale album, it was months. It was months of work. The systems were so perfectly crafted and sculpted right down to every nuance and finesse. The triggers were all worked out. I spent days rehearsing with the triggers and stuff so that we could improvise these large blocks together and get the kind of energy that you heard them recording. The guys are playing their pants off, but it's because what's being fired at them is just bam, 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 and that took a lot of prep. So there's no straight answer, Mel, but I think it's situation based.
Right. Next question then. Thanks, Jonathan. Nice to see you again. Indeed. Can you talk briefly about how the now possible pure guitar input has changed the work you've done in the DAW? I can imagine that from an instrument gestural perspective, this is profound.
Yeah. Thanks, Miles. It's great to see you or see you virtually. I'm going to grab this thing behind me. So I don't know if you can see that on camera, but this is the latest thing I'm working with. It's the rubber riding machine. It has an XY controller pad, a joystick. It has multiple outputs. It sends MIDI data. It's got piezo crystal data as well. It's got pickup data. These are all pressure pads over here. And this guitar, what he's done is the fretboard itself is actually underneath here as a full circuit board. So it works as a on-off switch. Every time you touch the string, it's got to be a certain type of string. It activates the pitch. So I don't have to touch the guitar. So why I thought just to grab that to show you is I'm completely having to not only rethink how I work with the DAW and the design of the systems. I'm having to relearn how to play guitar because this guitar offers you choices where you can pick, don't have to pick. Those buttons, you can fret chords and tap the buttons, then you can activate certain of the strings with buttons. It's like completely mad. So
cool.
I think it does reshape it, but I do think, Miles, that the information must flow both ways. It's not just about the DAW anymore, and it's not just about the guitar, it's the free flow. And that, I guess, ties back to Theo's question about the Cyber Guitar project and instrument design. I think what I learned from that is that everything impacts everything. And if it doesn't, then really what you've got is a trick, a cheap trick. It's a pedal on or off situation. It's got to flow and shape the music as well. I think Meryl's got another one there. So.
Thanks so much for the talk. I find that it can be difficult to encourage free improvisation with players who come from traditions. And so she says she's curious about your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I'm too. I'm actually quite nervous about this course that launches at the end of the month. It's a second-year course, and at Liverpool, there's no real jazz course. It's a kind of indie pop rock course. Then there's also a music technology degree, which is quite advanced. They do live production, max objects and stuff already in second year, and then they have a classical music focused performance degree. And their problem is they've never been able to get, or not never, but they found it difficult to get flow between the classical musicians, the electronic musicians, and the pop musicians. And so this course has kind of made it, I suppose, my responsibility, or, it's geared towards trying to do that. So, and I was worried that people wouldn't sign up, but it's actually full, the course is full. So it's going to be people from different perspectives, and we're going to try and use the software systems to facilitate that. So it'll be 10 to 20 laptops, all Ableton linked, and we'll use tempo as a way to get into action going. Yeah, it's a good question and really tricky problem.
Right. Wow. I think the chat has been worked through.
Okay.
So yeah, right. Indeed, tell me, keep things afloat, keep steering things. It can be challenging. It remains for me to thank you, Jonathan, for your time, your effort, your input. Please know that you've got a huge fan club down south. And
we hope to get out there to play it.
Absolutely. And we're looking
Yeah.
forward to the next album, please.
Yeah. Well, watch out. There's people that are interested. Watch out for the single. The single will be called Bounce. It's coming out at the end of the month with a music video, and then we'll be releasing a second single probably at the end of October, which is called In the Spring. The album will be available on vinyl, and if you're interested, you can go to jonathancrossley.uk. That'll be the new site. It's still under construction, but it should be live by the end of the week. And you can follow for updates on all that horrible social media stuff like Instagram and Facebook. And
right. Just repeat that URL, Jonathan Crossley.
It's jonathancrossley.uk.
.uk. Okay,
yeah.
Super. Jonathan, keep well and speak soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Ciao.
Ciao.